Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that the war in Gaza will not end until Hamas is fully disarmed and the territory demilitarized. His statements come as Hamas handed over the remains of 2 hostages yesterday. Meanwhile, Israel has announced that the Rafah border crossing with Egypt will remain closed until Hamas hands over the bodies of deceased hostages. However, the release of all 20 living hostages has been completed, as the U.S. alleges Hamas plans to violate the ceasefire while Netanyahu and Palestinian authorities continue to trade blame. Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to an immediate ceasefire after talks mediated by Qatar and Turkey, ending a week of deadly border clashes. Qatar's foreign ministry has announced that both nations will hold and follow up meetings to implement mechanisms for lasting peace and stability. Millions of Americans have rallied across all states in No Kings protests against President Donald Trump's hardline policies, with organizers claiming attendance of 7 million nationwide, as protesters criticize that President Trump's actions pose a threat to U.S. democracy. Japan's Liberal Democratic Party and Japan Innovation Party, known locally as Ishin Party, have now agreed to form a coalition government, paving the way for Sanai Takaichi to become Japan's first female prime minister. Under the deal, Ishin lawmakers will back Takaichi in upcoming Tuesday's parliamentary vote. Bolivians will vote in presidential runoff today as conservative leader Rodrigo Paz and centrist leader Rodrigo Quiroga seek to end decades of socialist rule and address the country's ongoing economic crisis, while both candidates aim to strengthen ties with the United States, with the next president set to take office on November 8th. While the Colombian president Gustavo Petro has confirmed the 1 suspect's return but has criticized Washington of killing an innocent fisherman and violating Colombia's sovereignty as tensions rise between some South African nations and the U.S. Austria has now reversed its position and will support the EU's 19th sanctions package against Russia ahead of Monday's vote in Luxembourg. According to its foreign ministry, the package includes new energy and financial measures, such as a ban on Russian LNG from January 2027, while the European Commission moves to address Slovakia's remaining concerns. Now, Hamas has now categorically denied the United States' recent accusations, which claim that the Palestinian group is planning an imminent attack on civilians in Gaza, which would violate the ceasefire as agreed upon in Sharm el-Sheikh. Addressing the allegations in a social media post, Hamas leadership has stated that the claims made by the USA are consistent with Israel's propaganda, and that it is in fact Israel that is arming, financing, and supporting these gangs who are perpetrating violence on the civilians in Gaza, who are carrying out murders, kidnappings, and thefts of aid trucks, as well as robberies against Palestinian civilians. This comes after the USA posted a statement citing credible reports of an imminent attack, which would constitute a severe violation of the ceasefire, and calling on the Palestinian groups to uphold its obligations under the terms of the ceasefire. The U.S. has also warned Hamas about the repercussions of going ahead with this attack, saying that measures will be taken to protect the people of Gaza and preserve the integrity of the ceasefire. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He's an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University and senior fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dr. and Professor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, how fragile is this ceasefire phase 1, and what are the challenges that are still not resolved between this?
Well, the main challenge right now is that Hamas has not yet met its obligations under the ceasefire, which is to release all the killed hostages. It has only released part of them, and that is a breach of the agreement. Now, Hamas claims that it does not know where all the bodies are, which is very unlikely. But Israel did provide to the United States and to some of the other intermediaries all the information, all the intelligence that we have on the location of all the bodies. And as long as Hamas does not return all the bodies of the hostages that it abducted, then there will be no progress with the ceasefire. Another issue, of course, is the mass killing of civilians by Hamas since Israel's withdrawal from some of the areas of the Gaza Strip, which raises, of course, much concern about the ability and the willingness of the international community to disarm this terrorist organization.
And Professor, now looking back at the demand by Israel and also other world leaders or U.S. for the entire disarmament of Hamas, how do you think, how realistic is this?
Much of it depends on the willingness of the countries that were involved in the signature of the ceasefire, mostly the United States. The United States is the main guarantor of this agreement. President Trump has expressed many times, including when he addressed the Knesset, Israel's parliament last week, that he is determined to disarm Hamas. There was also, as we know, a statement at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit also last week, reaffirming this commitment. That will require military presence from other countries on the ground with a credible ability and willingness to confront Hamas and to take away its weapons.
And Professor and Dr. Navon, how do you think who will be able to do it? Do you think it would be U.S. or Qatar or Turkey or any other country who would be strong enough to put this emphasis on Hamas to disarm or push them to disarm?
Well, I don't expect, unfortunately, I do not expect Turkey and Qatar to confront Hamas because they support Hamas, in fact. There's no doubt that as far as Israel is concerned, the role that President Trump agreed to grant to Qatar and Turkey in the Gaza Strip is very concerning because those are two regimes that are supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, including Hamas, which is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So obviously, those two countries are not going to dissolve Hamas. It will have to be done by armies of other countries that are less supportive of Hamas, but definitely not Turkey and Qatar. At the end of the day, I doubt that the United States will send troops on the ground. In fact, I think President Trump made very clear that at this point he does not intend to send American soldiers in Gaza. But as long as there is no military force in the areas evacuated by Israel with a clear mandate and a willingness to disarm Hamas, it will be very elusive to disarm this terrorist organization.
Thank you, Dr. Navon, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now we stay on this topic. Another body of a slain Israeli hostage was identified in Israel as 54-year-old Ronen Engel from Kibbutz Nir Oz. Engel's body was handed over by the Palestinian militant group Hamas as part of a U.S. brokered deal to end the war in Gaza. Another body was handed over and is yet to be identified by Israel. Under the agreement between Israel and Hamas, the Islamist group has released 20 living hostages last week and is to release remaining 28 bodies it was holding since its attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. Now, Hamas has so far released 13 bodies to Israel, one of which was not of an Israeli hostage, leaving at least 16 slain hostages still in Gaza. In exchange for the hostages release, Israel had released nearly 2,000 Palestinian convicted prisoners and detainees. Now for this discussion, we go back to Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He's an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University, as well as senior fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dr. Navon, for staying with us. Now, looking back at this, why is there a huge difference in ratio of the released personnel from both sides, from Hamas as well as Israel?
Because unfortunately, these are the demands of Hamas, and Israel is willing to pay a very heavy price to free its hostages, and Hamas knows this. Hamas is a death cult, but it is a death cult that knows that Israel and Jews in general, for us, one of the most important values is life. We value life as much as they value death. So they brought upon death and destruction of their own people for a demented ideology, and they don't care about the dead people in Gaza. But we, on the other hand, we value life, and we are willing to pay a very heavy price to save our civilians. And Hamas knows this, which is why Hamas has been able to blackmail Israel. And for each civilian abducted from his or her bed on October 7, we've had to release many more convicted criminals, people who committed crimes and acts of terrorism and killed people with their own hands. And that is a tragedy, which is why Hamas has been using abductions and hostages in order to release its own killers and criminals. Hence the difference in numbers.
And how are people in Israel? Are they happy with the current status of this peace plan or peace phase 1 and how it is unfolding as of now?
Well, I think the different polls conducted in Israel on public opinion show that a majority of Israelis support the ceasefire agreement that was brokered by President Trump, by the United States, especially, of course, the release of the last hostages, the living hostages, and hopefully very soon all the bodies of the killed ones. But the question is, of course, what will happen now? And we've discussed it before. Will there be really a better future for both people or not? Unfortunately, we have very good reasons to be very skeptical about Hamas and its backers. But I would say that most Israelis, of course, after 2 years of a very, very harsh war, support the fact that finally, after 2 years, not only have our hostages, living hostages, been released, but also don't forget that after 2 years of war, Israel has basically prevailed over the Iranian axis of aggression by crippling, together with the United States, the Iranian nuclear program and missile program, the fall of the Assad regime, the fact that both Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza have been mostly crippled. But the struggle is not over. The war is over, but the struggle for Israel's future and well-being is not, because our enemies are still there and still trying to do mischief.
Yes, Dr. Navon, as you rightfully mentioned, a lot of our guests mentioned that this is not, the problem, it hasn't been solved in long term. So when talking about long-term resolution between these two, Gaza and Israel, who do you think should be representing Palestine or Gaza? Should it be PA or should it be Hamas? And how serious should these organizations be taken?
Well, the question of representation should belong to the people. Unfortunately, as we know, there is no democracy not only among the Palestinians, but more generally in the Arab world. Look at our region, look at the Middle East. Nowhere in the Middle East, except in Israel, is there freedom and democracy. So, the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, was last elected in 2005 for a 4-year term. That was 20 years ago. He has outlived his mandate for 16 years. As for the Gaza Strip, I remind you that Israel completely withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, and therefore the local population could and should have taken its own destiny to its hands, and maybe it could have turned Gaza into a successful country with an elected government, but it didn't. Instead, it brought Hamas to power, and Hamas has turned the Gaza Strip into a military power, basically a terror state. So it's not for Israel to decide who should represent the Arab Palestinian population, but unfortunately, they're not given a chance because in the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, they're ruled by a corrupt and undemocratic Palestinian Authority. And in Gaza, Hamas took power in 2007 and has brought catastrophe on that territory.
Yes, Dr. Navon, that was a perfect answer, and I will improve my question. Thank you very much for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now we stay on the region. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has called for the start of the second phase of ceasefire talks in Gaza and stress on the entry of sufficient humanitarian aid into the Palestinian territory. Now, Abdelati has made these remarks in Cairo at a press conference after meeting with Foreign Minister of Maldives, Abdullah Khalil. He has noted that the mediators have successfully resolved the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and it is now time to look ahead. He has expressed hope that all parties would start negotiations for the second phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. He has also stressed the importance of making urgent efforts to ensure that aid supplies can reach the Gaza Strip without obstruction. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Manuel Navon. Thank you, Dr. Navon, for staying with us. Dr. Navon, looking back at this aid situation in Gaza, is there any trustworthy supplier who can distribute aid safely and make sure that these aids are not taken advantage of in this current situation over there?
The answer, unfortunately, is no, because as long as Hamas has any type of power in the Gaza Strip, it will continue to basically take control of the aid. Not for the benefit of the civilian population, but in order for Hamas to regroup and to rebuild and to amass and to replenish its coffers. This has been happening for the past 2 years. Israel tried to bring alternative suppliers. As we know, it was partly successful, partly not. Unfortunately, the UN itself is part of the problem. As we know, UNRWA is basically a branch of Hamas. It's been infected by Hamas terrorists, so it's not trustworthy at all. The fact that it's related to the UN doesn't mean that it is trustworthy, on the contrary. So the bottom line is that as long as Hamas has some control in the Gaza Strip, any organization that brings in humanitarian aid, as has been the case for the past 2 years, that aid will be looted by Hamas in order for it, as I said before, to replenish its coffers and to regroup. And that is a tragedy. That's why the priority right now is not only to disarm Hamas, but to make sure that there is an alternative administration that takes over and that Hamas gives away power. But for this, you need a resolute international force to enter Gaza with a mandate, with determination, and with the means to disarm and to dislocate Hamas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel Navon, for joining us today and sharing that insight from Tel Aviv. Now we move on to our next news. In a major development, South Korea's presidential advisor has stated that the South Korea and the United States have made significant progress in trade talks. The official have said that there is a high chance the two countries will reach a trade deal before the upcoming APEC summit. He has also emphasized that the most major issues have seen concrete advances, bringing the two sides closer to finalizing an agreement that could strengthen economic ties and boost bilateral trade in the coming future. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Dr. Astash Chada. She's an Witymykan University professor, joins us live from Warsaw. Thank you very much, Dr. Asta, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking back at this, it's been a while that we've seen these U.S.-Korea trade talk go on, but they haven't announced a concrete any agreement, right, or deal. So what are the likely strategic and economic motivations behind South Korea and the United States accelerating their trade negotiations and reaching to these negotiations ahead of APEC summit?
Yeah, thank you for having me to discuss this very important issue. So as you were mentioning earlier, there isn't much clarity on what exactly they're trying to achieve and by when they're trying to achieve, apart from a very imminent deal deadline that has been mentioned, which is towards the end of or before the upcoming APEC summit at the end of this month. But what is very, very sure at this point is that South Korea seems to be very much on board in terms of allowing US to gain this special package deal. The financial context of this deal is very, very important, right? So from the US side, there's the understanding that there would be a potential impact on South Korea's $350 billion financial package on Seoul's foreign exchange market. So the deal cannot just be one-sided and cannot just be something that benefits the United States, but it has to be within the wider South Korean tolerance, so that there is no domestic financial repercussion. And the other thing which is very clear is that it was making news very recently that South Korea was on board to make American shipbuilding great again. So they have reached some sort of an agreement for a $150 billion investment in American shipbuilding. So again, the idea is that if South Korea makes that grand investment, US would cut down on duties on South Korean products. So again, this is a very transactional deal that we are looking forward to, though the details are yet to be decided.
Yes, and Dr. Asta, as you've mentioned, one of the cards that South Korea could play is making America's shipbuilding great again. So what else are there for South Korea? What cards are there for South Korea to reach a deal or finalize the trade deal with US?
Right. So, I mean, I suppose at least for South Korea, there are a couple of main things that they are looking at, right? And one important aspect of that is the geopolitical supply chain. And if you just look slightly back a few days, China had banned transactions and cooperation with, for instance, Hanwha Ocean's US-linked units. Right, in the United States, citing that there would be some security risks, and they alleged some involvement of US investigative activities there. Now, those things do hurt South Korean business at a global scale, right, if they are going to suffer Chinese countermeasures. So that's one. Two, they're trying to in some way de-risk the geopolitical supply chain, and specifically in case of shipbuilding. So they're talking about the ship component modules for final assembly in South Korea, right? So this is illustrating how no matter what product and what grand scale of industry we are talking about, there are going to be several players involved in it. So in a way, they're trying to future-proof those supply chains. And the third thing I see, which is very, very important, is that South Korea remains very, very important to United States and vice versa, right? So as long as South Korea is willing to engage with this new MASGA vision, which is making American shipbuilding great again within the wider MAGA, aim of the United States foreign policy, it is very likely that South Korea might also get some benefits in return, and especially under the Trump presidency.
And we can only speculate, but do you think in APEC summit we will see North Korean leaders show up as well, or as in the last time when South Korean leader met with President Trump, he kind of joked about this. Do you think it will just stay as a joke?
Yeah, it's a very good question, but again, it can only be a speculation. I've heard those ideas as well, but it seems very unlikely for two main reasons. One, this APEC summit is going to be looking specifically towards strengthening this newfound US inward-looking foreign policy of making America great again, right? And as of now, specifically looking at the economic aspect of it, now North Korea does not quite figure as one such nation that would be willing to make a lot of concessions to United States. That's one. And two, in the recent past, even though we saw Trump 1.0 administration engaging very actively with North Korea, that has not been the case under Trump 2.0 administration, right? So we don't see any of those developments in the same way. There doesn't seem to be a lot of hype around those intended or possible participation by North Korean side. Those are two important things. I think it's very, very unlikely. And if it does happen, it would be pretty much a shock to everyone.
Right, indeed. We'll be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Dr. Asta Chada, for joining us again and sharing that insight. Now we stay in the region. Chinese President Xi Jinping has extended his congratulations to Cheng Li-wen on her election as the new chairperson of Taiwan's Chinese Kuomintang Party. Cheng has secured the position in the party election held on Saturday, winning 50.15% of the vote. In his message, Xi has expressed hope that the two parties would strengthen their shared political foundation, unite the majority of people in Taiwan, and promote deeper exchanges and cooperation. He has emphasized on advancing common development and the cause of national reunification. Cheng Li-wen has responded with gratitude for Xi's wishes, signaling openness to continued engagement between the parties. This comes amid rising cross-strait tensions, as Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense has reported that 9 Chinese military aircraft and 7 naval vessels were detected near Taiwan's territorial waters on October 18th. Now we move on to our next news. A series of demonstrations have taken place in the United States under the banner of No Kings Protest. The widespread protests have raised voices against the Trump administration. The movement asserts that the executive is using its power without considering the limits imposed by the Constitution. The first major No Kings protest occurred in June, drawing millions of participants across the United States. However, the second wave of protests has gained momentum, garnering support from Democratic leaders and civil society personalities. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders gave a speech in Vermont, slamming the Trump administration and stating that President Trump and his allies have hijacked the economy and political system of the United States. Let's listen into what he has said.
Today, in the year 2025, in this dangerous moment in American history, our message is exactly the same. No, President Trump, we don't want you or any other king to rule us. Thank you very much, but we will maintain our democratic form of society. We will not move toward authoritarianism in America. We, the people, will rule. We rejected the divine right of kings in the 1770s. We will not accept the divine right of oligarchs today.
Among other speakers, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy accused President Trump of being the most corrupt president of the U.S. Let's listen into what the senator has said.
Is that Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America. The truth is that he is enacting a detailed step-by-step plan to try to destroy all of the things that protect our democracy, free speech, fair elections, an independent press, the right to peacefully protest. But the truth is also this: he has not won yet. The people still rule in this country.
Popular journalist Mehdi Hassan also addressed the gathering, comparing the Trump administration to the fascist threat against the freedom of the people. Let's listen into what he has said.
Our constitutional republic destroyed by the guy from Home Alone 2. Not going to do it. Because I did not inherit America. I did not inherit America. I chose America. I wasn't born here. I immigrated here. And we immigrants, we love this country often more than the people who are born here, because we chose to move here, live here, swear an oath to the Constitution here. An oath that the guy down the street violates every morning and every night.
Another popular TV personality and scientist, Bill Nye, has asked people to raise their voices against the Trump administration and demanded the rule of law. Let's listen in.
Let us now raise our voices. We are here demanding a return to the rule of law. Let the world know that we will suffer no king. We will put the United States back on a course to lead the world in fair governance. Together, no thrones, no crowns, no kings. Thank you all. Let's change the world.
Now we have a breaking news. According to witnesses and media report, Israeli aircraft has carried out 2 strikes on southern Gaza today. A military official has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire, claiming it has attacked Israeli troops. Now, 2 Palestinian eyewitnesses has said that fighting erupted in Rafah, in the southern part of the city, still under Israeli control, before the airstrikes followed. The Israeli official has stated that Hamas fighters had opened fire using snipers and a rocket-propelled grenade in an area east of the Yellow Line, calling it a bold violation of the ceasefire. The official did not confirm the airstrikes directly, but warned that such actions threaten regional stability. According to witnesses and media reports, Israeli aircraft has carried out 2 strikes on southern Gaza today. A military official has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire, claiming it has attacked 2 Israeli troops. 2 Palestinian eyewitnesses have said that the fighting erupted in Rafah, in the southern part of the city still under Israeli control, before the airstrikes followed. The Israeli official has stated that Hamas fighters had opened fire and are using snipers as well as rocket-propelled grenade in an area east of the Yellow Line, calling it a bold violation of the ceasefire. The official did not confirm the airstrikes directly, but has warned that such actions threaten regional stability. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Sol Sadka. He's a security analyst and author, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Sol, for joining us again. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
Thank you. Sol, can you tell us a little bit more about what's the geographic location exactly of Rafah, and what do they mean when they say Yellow Line in Rafah?
Right. So the part of the ceasefire deal was that Israel would initially withdraw to a line that gave Israel and the IDF control of about 55% of the Gaza Strip, while the other 45% was under the control of Hamas. And the plan was, initially at the beginning of the ceasefire, they would immediately return all the living hostages, all 20 of them, which is what happened. And they were also within, I think it was 2 days, meant to return the bodies of 28 hostages that had either been murdered in captivity or that had been taken dead from Israel 2 years ago. They've released, if I can count correctly, approximately 10 or 12 of them, but around 16 of the bodies still remain. And only once Hamas has handed over all the bodies does the next stage of the ceasefire begin, which is meant to be the disarmament of Hamas. And after the disarmament of Hamas, then at that point there are further lines that Israel is meant to withdraw to. But the initial line gives the IDF control of 55% of Gaza, of the original size of the Gaza Strip. In truth, almost everything within the IDF zone of control has been destroyed in the fighting over the past 2 years. There's virtually no buildings standing in that area. And even within the Hamas-controlled portion of the Gaza Strip that remains under Hamas control, on the western side of this so-called Yellow Line, a large number of homes and businesses have also been destroyed. The devastation there is quite catastrophic, as is expected in urban warfare, particularly when the enemy uses every civilian structure as a potential booby trap site. So that's where we are, and the Hamas fighters are instructed to stay on the other side of the yellow line. There have been a number of instances already over the 4 or 5 days that the ceasefire has been in effect that have seen the IDF shoot and even kill Hamas operatives that were approaching the yellow line, which was demarcated. And it seems that there has been another one today on the southern part of the strip at Rafah. Rafah, if you recall, Rafah used to be a city that straddled the Israel-Egypt border, rather than Gaza Strip Egypt border. Approximately a third of the city was on the Egyptian side, and 2/3 on the other side. When the Egyptians controlled, or rather when the Egyptians were occupying between 1948 and 1967, Rafah grew. And since both sides of that border were controlled by Egypt, it didn't really matter where the border was. But in the 80s, when Israel withdrew from the Sinai, it ended up that Rafah was split down the middle, with some of it in Egypt and some of it in Rafah. Now, because the city was like this, it became a site of smuggling. Almost all the arms that Hamas have and ever did have were taken across the Rafah crossing, or they were taken in tunnels under the Rafah crossing in that area. The Israeli army has been digging up, and still continues to dig up, hundreds of smuggling tunnels under that area. The Egyptians noticed that the fact that they had a border with Gaza was causing them terror problems, because every terrorist within a 1,000-kilometer radius was making a beeline for that very border to try and link up with Hamas. And so what they did in around 2007, and something they got almost no notice but is quite visible on the satellite maps, is they entirely demolished their side of Rafah. Approximately 20,000 people were displaced, and every single building was razed, and the area abutting the border with Gaza was turned into a 7-kilometer deep exclusion zone. The war has led to the remainder of Rafah on the Israeli side as well, essentially being reduced to complete rubble. There's almost no building standing in Rafah. And the IDF hold bases. They also hold humanitarian centers where people come to get food aid under the GHF program. And what seems to have happened, that we don't know the details. Although I did hear the jets flying overhead about 20 minutes ago, so I figured things were heating up there again. What we do know is that some Hamas men approached the yellow line that they're not supposed to cross under the ceasefire agreement, and have been subjects of airstrikes. And I'm sure the details will emerge.
Yes, Sol, thank you for that thorough explanation for my question. And also, looking at today's news that has come in, there are still a lot of sticking points and challenges to this fragile ceasefire, but one of them is demilitarization of Hamas, right? How do you think, how is it going to be, and do you think there is any international power that can make sure that demilitarization, Hamas does demilitarize, or de-armament takes place?
It's a very, very sad time. It's what I've been saying since the ceasefire was signed, that once the hostages are released, Hamas will still exist in a very denuded form compared to what they were, perhaps down 90%. But that 10% is still sufficient to pose a threat, but a threat only to Gazans. They really have no way to project power across the buffer zone with Israel. 10,000 Israeli troops will be stationed around that line, around that yellow line, or whatever line is withdrawn to in future, in perpetuity, and that's not a problem for Israel. They have a standing army that can do that. But Hamas will remain if they are not disarmed. And the Gazan people who live there, 1.5 to 2 million people in the Gaza Strip, are now controlled by them, and they have everything to fight for. And the Gazan people do not have weapons to fight even the 10% of Hamas that remains. So Hamas has been reduced to what I call a Gazan people's problem. That's all they are. That's all that's left of them. And who is going to disarm them? Who is going to disarm them? Well, the IDF certainly has no interest in disarming them. They don't really care who runs the rubble of Gaza, as long as they have no ability to attack Israel. And I guarantee you that there are no Arab armies in the world who have the willingness, or perhaps even the ability, to go into Gaza and start fighting Hamas terrorists and losing their own troops. So who's going to do it? The Western nations aren't going to do it. The only nation could have defeated Hamas completely was the IDF. The IDF could have done it. And if the war would have continued for a few more months, that probably is what would have happened. And that would have led to the freedom of the people of Gaza, a genuinely potential for what they call a free Palestine, in inverted commas. That, unfortunately, looks to me very implausible. I just don't see, when you game it out, how that will end up happening at this point. I don't see how. I got to tell you the truth. And to me, the things in Gaza, the future looks extremely bleak for them. I feel very sorry for the Gazan people, even though so many of them celebrated October 7th. I feel sorry for many of them, because I don't see how they can get out from under the cosh of the Hamas rulers, who no one in the world right now has a sufficient motivation. There are motivations, but insufficient motivations to be willing to lose men fighting them, to remove them from their last vestiges of power. So it could well be what we'll see is a sort of North Korea situation where you have this small territory which everybody wants to leave, gradually becoming even more isolated, and it could continue for decades with perhaps no end in sight.
Totally.
Although I hope I'm wrong, and I hope there is some kind of way to break this impasse, but the ceasefire deal was always very vague, and it was always clear that once Israel got 90% of what it wanted, which is to get out its hostages and to make Hamas no longer a threat to them, that Israel had no motivation anymore to continue dealing with them. And then the question was going to be, who did have that motivation? And so far, it's becoming clear that the answer is really probably no one.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that analysis. Thank you very much, Sol Sadka, for joining us and sharing that insight as a security analyst and author from Tel Aviv. That's all we have time for. We